How's it
Yes,
going?
Mark. Good evening, John.
Hi, everybody.
Mark and John, how's it going? So,
Good.
good evening, everybody, and welcome to 120 Stories, 120 Dublin Stories with Santa Rita. My name's Mark Corry, and I'm the head of design at the Little Museum. Great to be here, standing in for Sarah tonight, sitting in for Sarah, because it's her birthday today. Happy birthday, Sarah. So please bear with me if anything goes wrong, if we have any technical difficulties. It might happen, it might not. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? We're going to have a bit of crack anyway. We're going to talk about Italia 90 tonight, the subject of our new exhibition. And we're delighted to have the curator and author, historian, Mark Duncan with us tonight. So welcome, Mark.
Mark, delighted to be there.
Great. Along with Paul Rouse, of course, who's the co-curator of the exhibition. We're also delighted to be joined by barrister and award-winning poet, John O'Donnell. John, welcome to the webinar.
Thanks very much. I feel a bit of a fraud here, but I'll leave all the hard questions to Mark.
We'll leave a lot of things to Mark, I think, tonight, because I'm winging it for sure. So we'll start with Mark, actually, just so, like, you know, I was reading about that. Italia 90 was the 14th World Cup and was held in Italy for the second time. 30 years later, nobody really knows for sure who actually won that World Cup, but I think it was Ireland. Is that right, Mark?
I think you're showing your age there, Mark. There was, in and around the 30th anniversary during the summer, when everybody in the COVID lockdown with no live sport was indulging in a bout of sporting nostalgia, and we all travelled back to the Italian experience. I saw quite a few people mention online that they thought, or they were 13 or 14 years of old before they knew that Ireland didn't win the World Cup in 1990. And that's simply because it enjoys such a central place in Irish, not just in Irish sporting history, but I suppose in Irish social and cultural memory as well. I think it was a remarkable month. It was, I suppose, against the backdrop of the kind of social and economic conditions of the 1980s and early 90s. It was kind of a blissful break from an otherwise kind of grim reality. And, you know, even if that World Cup itself lacked enormously in quality, it's, you know, that doesn't correlate necessarily with people's lived experience of it. You know, you said it's the 14th World Cup. Ireland had never been to a World Cup before. When I say Ireland, I mean the Republic of Ireland. Sport on the island of Ireland, unlike rugby, unlike a number of the other major team sports, was divided. Northern Ireland had been there in '58. They'd be there spectacularly in 1982 in Spain when they beat the hosts. A brilliant goal by Jerry Armstrong. Sorry, I'm not sure it was a brilliant goal. It was a famous goal by Jerry Armstrong. Defeated the hosts on their home patch during that World Cup, and of course they were in Mexico in 1986 as well. But this was the Republic of Ireland's first time to travel to a World Cup. It was in Europe, you know, it was a flight away, it wasn't a world away. So it was very close to us. It enabled thousands of Irish people to travel to it. You know, I think when people reflect on that World Cup, I mean, it's famous for, I suppose, having the fewest goals per game in any World Cup then or since. You know, it's not a kind of it's a fairly kind of dismal record for any competition to have. It is kind of remarkable also that the administrators, the powers that be in world football, were forced into a series of rule changes to try and encourage a more kind of creative, expansive, exciting game in the years afterwards. So, you know, the Irish team, while their style was crude, while they may not have contributed huge amount to the enjoyment, the on-field enjoyment of the competition, I'm not sure they were that much of outliers in terms of the type of creativity they may have brought to the competition. But I mean, there's no doubt. I think when you park all of that and you come back here, Con Houlihan had that line, you know, that he missed the World Cup because he was in Italy. You know, when you, just before you came on there, you were kind of replaying a series of clips which are part of the exhibition. and they show the scenes on the streets of Dublin. There's photographs of kind of people kind of jumping into fountains, dancing on the street, you know, honking their car horns. You know, it was almost as if kind of it was okay to kind of let go of all of those kind of innate reservations that people might have had and just kind of enjoy yourself. You know, it was an absolutely exuberant summer, and you know, John had the good fortune. John, who's with us here, had the good fortune of being there. You know, I had the good fortune, I suppose, I was at a perfect age to meet Italia 90. I was just finished first year in university at that time, so I was old enough to be out there and enjoying the social side of the social side of the event, but young enough not to have a huge amount of responsibility on my shoulders that I didn't have to kind of look after anybody else. I didn't, you know, I wasn't burdened by responsibility. So it was a perfect time for me to have it. And I suppose that's one of those reasons why it's, you know, myself and my cohort of friends look back upon it so affectionately.
Your memory of it is good, very good, Mark. But I think you probably also remember it was as if the whole country had consumed a kind of a drug, but a very benign drug. But it was as if the whole country was on some sort of happy pill, and there was a tremendous innocence about it. I suppose, firstly, as you say, because we'd never been to a World Cup before. We'd been in the dress rehearsal in the European Championships in 1988, but we'd never been to a World Cup. We didn't even have the euro. We were still in national currencies. So in order to go to Italy, we had to get Italian lira. We had all that excitement of traveling. So that was one of the things. Then when the draw came out for the groups of the World Cup, and we realized that we were in the same group as England, who obviously the old enemy, and that we were going to, our first game in the World Cup was going to be against England. That was an amazing sense. That added to the piquancy of the group. And then Holland, who had knocked us out with a goal with 8 minutes to go in the European Championships, stopped us. If we'd drawn that game, we would have been in the semi-final of the European Championships. And in fact, the people who were in the final of the European Championships in 1988 were the other two teams from our group, Holland and Russia. So from that point of view, you know, we had an experience of it, but the idea of being in a World Cup, the European Championship was one thing, but the idea of being in a World Cup was amazing. And one of the things that people started to talk about straight away was, oh, I'm going. Or I'm going. Oh, no, we're all going to go. And not everybody did, of course. But Roddy Doyle talks about this in his book, In the Van. He talks about people getting together and saying, we're going to go. And I think one of the things, when you look at it now, you look and see those pictures of the pubs packed with people, packed. I remember they set up, you know, viewing areas in the RDS and so on. Places absolutely packed with people, and when you look at the sadness of the pubs as they currently are, it's a tremendous contrast and makes me anyway certainly even more nostalgic for those times. Because there was also, as I said, it was as if the whole country was on drugs, but there was a kind of an innocence about it. There was our first time ever in a major world event of this sort for soccer, and certainly I remember that the happiness and the joy, and also the kind of ludicrousness of some of the things we did. Like normally, a normal sentient Irish person wouldn't have the remotest interest in watching Egypt play Holland. You if it was in the back garden, you'd go out to the front. But once they were in the same group as us, we said we have to see what the opposition is like. So we have to watch the Egypt Holland match. You know, all that kind of ludicrousness overtook us completely. So even I remember at the start that excitement building in a way that it's hard to communicate now. But I certainly remember it very well.
And you said, John, that you're at the Euro '88 Championships as well.
Yeah, I went to Stuttgart for the Ireland-England game, and again, you know, just to go back, if you remember, I don't know if people remember, but Ray Houghton scored a goal in the 6th minute, the goal that ultimately won. And there's a story, I won't name the bar, but there's a story about a very big bar in a Dublin suburb. This match was on a Sunday, and you may recall that back then in 1988, we still had a holy hour. The pubs had to shut on Sunday afternoons. And there's a story about a Garda squad car coming up to outside this bar and seeing hundreds of cars thrown up on the grass and kind of double, treble parked. And a guard goes up and knocked on the side door of the bar. and said, "Is there anybody in here who shouldn't be?" Because it was supposed to be closed. They said, "No, it's just staff cleaning up." After the closed, and of course the guard went back, sat in
All
his car.
500 of them.
And then when Ireland scored, the roof nearly came off this supposedly empty bar. So yeah, I was there in Stuttgart in '88, and Dermot Bulger wrote about this in his play In High Germany, about the coming together of Irish people from across Europe and indeed from across the world to celebrate the Ireland in the European Championship. I nearly said the Eurovision, the European Championship, and that happened again because, well, that's the only thing we won in Europe was the Eurovision. That's the only thing that we were good at. But he does that very well in his play In High Germany, about the coming together of people to support the Irish team. And that happened again with even greater numbers in 1990.
Right. And, I guess just to come on to say the people using the flags and waving flags around the city, flags are kind of tricky things, especially now the American flag has kind of taken on a different kind of purpose, being it's being used by Trump in some certain ways. But I think maybe you can expand more, but in Ireland in the 80s, the Irish flag was kind of before it was kind of used by in Republican sense, and it's not really that, people weren't that proud of it. But I guess the Irish soccer team kind of changed that a little bit.
Yeah, there is a huge play made of this, Mark, because you had Irish people going abroad in such numbers, dressed in the green, waving the tricolour. And of course, the backdrop here is the Troubles. We are now hitting on 20 years of violence and mayhem in the north of Ireland, but not confined to the north of Ireland. It's happening in Britain. It's happening in other parts of Ireland as well. When you look back, and for the exhibition, I went back and looked back at a lot of the newspaper coverage, a lot of the magazine coverage, a lot of the commentary that was being made, that was being written around the Irish World Cup experience. And it is really striking to find so many people discussing this idea that what we were seeing on the streets of Rome or Palermo, or indeed in the streets of Dublin and other towns and villages around the country, was somehow a different type of Irishness to what we had seen in the previous 10 years. They were almost deliberately setting it up in contrast, to that kind of to that kind of Republican flag waving that we had seen. And I mean, that violence is so. I mean, it is so divisive. Now, Eamon McCann, even at the time, Eamon McCann, the civil rights activist there from Derry, was reviewing the media for the McGill magazine at the time, and he picked up on this point. He said, "Well, actually, is this a case of writers like Anne Harris in the Sunday Independent, like Kevin Myers in the Irish Times? Is this just a case of them imposing their own political meaning on what is actually happening, and that actually people weren't actually thinking in those terms in any case, and they weren't consciously, setting themselves apart from that different type of nationalism?" And he made the point that in journals such as on Fublock, the Sinn Féin official newspaper, they were as much enthralled to the Irish soccer team's performance in Italy as any of the other daily newspapers. So, I mean, yes, I think it's a fair point to make, but you can almost lose the run of yourself here, and maybe lose sight of the fact that actually people. These debates were run. These were open debates in our society. So of course, people were going to cling to this exuberant or joyous display of Irishness and try and contrast it with something else. Myers, towards the end of the World Cup, when he was reflecting upon it, like his sign off was, something that said, "When you see people disgrace this country, as surely they will do in the coming days and weeks," he says, "maybe you can cast back maybe your memory can cast back to those joyous days in Italy when to be Irish was to be wonderful, you know. Again, a sense that what we were experiencing was fleeting. It will pass. And, you know, when I talked about that blissful break from reality, we were going to revert back to it as soon as the World Cup was over. And to some extent, we did. You know, the changes that we see in society took some time to actually take effect.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting you talk about the flag, because there was no stigma, there was no second guessing involved back then in flying the Irish flag at a football match. Now, if we were carrying it on the street and at a protest, I mean, that's different. But there was absolutely no stigma. And one of the most famous flags, which you still see, is, of course, Davy Keogh says hello. And that's and people thought nothing of this. I heard stories about people seeing vendors in Italy selling the Irish flag, except that it was reversed. It was the Indian flag, because it showed how unfamiliar the vendors of football merchandise were with Ireland, with good reason. Back in 1988, when we first played our first game in the European Championships, they didn't play the chorus of Our Own Navian, they played the verse of it. And all of us were standing there saying, what on earth is this? So that the band who had been hired in Germany didn't know the Irish national anthem. And I suppose in some circumstances, this kind of lack of familiarity made it even more fun. It made us even more gleeful about the whole thing. But there was no question of any political kind of difficulties or stigma attached to it. And there was also this, whether it was true or not, but there's certainly this myth that the Irish fans were lovable, joyous, happy fans who would get drunk but wouldn't fight. And that's one of the things I remember about going to, if you remember, in the English team were in Cagliari, and the town was locked down, and they weren't, the bars were closed, they weren't allowed to get drink and so on. And there was a big fear about the English fans, whereas the Irish fans, there was no worries about them at all. They had no concerns at all. And that, again, I suppose, spoke to how we were viewed in Ireland as effectively, at least in Europe, as effectively harmless. But it was a very interesting distinction. And while we weren't necessarily pointedly thinking, oh, well, we are ambassadors for our country, I never heard any story of anybody letting themselves down or disgracing themselves, as Myers put it.
Do you not think, John, that in part, you know, that, I mean, it becomes part of the Irish, you know, soccer self-image that our supporters are this, fun-loving, peaceful supporters, you know, that we don't cause trouble wherever we go. And, you know, Irish people embraced it because almost in some respect we were setting ourselves up again against the English supporters whose track record in the 1980s was absolutely appalling. You have to remember that English soccer clubs have been thrown out of European competition. The English soccer team hadn't been. So even at the time of the 1990 World Cup, English soccer teams were barred from European competition at that stage, you know. And that is why we ended up in Cagliari. We were basically the English supporters and the Dutch who had a problematic track record with the supporters. They were all short. So certainly for the group stages, get them off mainland Italy, and we can lock down the island, you know. And a number of Irish soccer officials, when they arrived on the flight, you know, were absolutely shocked just to see the heavy-handed police presence that was actually there.
It was strange, and you know, you talk about the police. There's a English World Cup bingo drinking game that you can call. That you can play, and every time certain phrases are used, you get to take a drink. And one of the phrases that you expect to hear is, "And the local police are being a bit heavy-handed now." You know, and that's the kind of reputation, as you say, that they earned. But I have to say that when I met the English fans in Stuttgart, they were absolutely they knew that it was a lucky win for us. And then the match that we won 1-1 in Cagliari, again we were lucky, but there was no faction fighting between Irish fans and English fans of any sort, none at all. The English fans tended to fight with each other or with the locals, but they'd never. I'm not aware of any fights that took place between English fans and Irish fans. So that wasn't part of the trouble at all. And in fact, when we will talk about Genoa, but when we went to Genoa for the Romania game, again, all the bars were closed because they were afraid of what was going to happen. Although we did manage to find one bar down a street and down another street and down another street. And when we walked into it, of course, the only people who were in there were Irish. So the only bar that was open in Genoa was filled with Irish supporters, drinking peacefully and making no trouble.
Speaking of the English, there's one famous Englishman involved in the Irish team. Big Jack hardly needs any introduction, but maybe Mark, you could, if you know, like, how was it when he was? I mean, he was hired in 1986, I think, and lost his first game against Wales. But how was he perceived back then as an English World Cup winner and brother of a famous footballer, but also, I guess, that kind of famous footballer himself? But as an Englishman coaching the Irish team, it must have been a bit odd, or how was it?
Well, he replaces Owen Hand. Owen Hand had been the manager up to 1985, and then the kind of towards the end of that year, once Ireland failed to qualify for the 1986 World Cup, the FAI set about trying to find a replacement. Jack was not expected to get the job. Many in the IFA, I think there was a bit of a mess up in the appointment process, because many of the FAI officials thought they'd actually chosen Paul Paisley, and Jack Charlton was the one who emerged fortuitously, as it turns out, as the manager. Charlton, as you said, he's probably overshadowed by his brother Bobby, Sir Bobby, who was part of that great Manchester United team. But like Jack, he was a World Cup winner in 1966 with England. Jack, when he arrived, he was really, you identify him with the Leeds United team of the late 60s and early 1970s, which were winning FA Cups, winning leagues. John Giles was part of that team as well. When Charlton joined them, a number of the older players who were still with Leeds at the time didn't think much of them, didn't think he was actually going to make a serious footballer at all. 4 years later, he's winning a World Cup. He was very tall. He's about 6'3". He was awkward, but he was very, very strong, and he was also a very honest footballer. So you could say that he made the most of his talents. He was surrounded by a very, very committed Leeds United team. And when he retired in his late 30s as a professional footballer, Jack always wanted to get the English job. He wanted to be English manager, and the call never came. And I think that hurt him. It would appear that stung from him, that actually no one ever even brought. I don't think he was even brought for an interview. I could be wrong there. I don't think he was even brought for an interview for the English job. He did have managerial experience. He was with Middlesbrough, quite successful there. He was with Sheffield Wednesday, reasonably successful there, and he'd been with Newcastle United, which had not been a good experience, and that had been in around 1984. So the end of his managerial career would have coincided with the arrival of someone like a young starlet like Paul Gascoigne in the early 1980s or mid 1980s in Newcastle. So when he arrives in Ireland, there is, as I said, he wasn't the obvious choice. That first game you mentioned, we played Wales in a friendly in Lansdowne Road. I was at the game. It was a grim game. We lose 1-0. There was little to enjoy about the experience. I recall just being there about half an hour before the game, and up in the rickety old stand there in Lansdowne Road, and you could hear your own voice echo around the ground at the time. It was a very, very small crowd. It was a very, very small crowd there on the day. And he didn't get off to a particularly good start. We'll probably get on later to some of the kind of the controversies, the Eamon Dunphy controversies, in around Italia 90. But, Dunphy and Charlton had already locked horns prior to that, over the treatment, say, of Liam Brady in those early years, over the exclusion of someone like Dave O'Leary, who of course becomes the hero of World Cup of the World Cup in 1990 with the penalty in the qualifying stage. So Charlton doesn't have the easiest rides of it to begin with. He gets lucky in sense that it actually we qualify for the European Championships in 1988, not on our own steam, but actually it's a goal from a Scottish footballer called Gary Mackay. I think it was against Bulgaria. It was his score. It was his score that sent us through to the European Championships. And of course, then everything changed. Everything changes. That experience, which John was fortunate enough to be part of, and really was a kind of a stepping stone to Italia 90. I see what we see in Italia 90. In Ireland, the reaction to it is just Euro 88, but it's multiplied. It's multiplied because it's a bigger event. We're on the global stage. It's a bigger tournament. There are only 8 teams in Euro 88, but it was still our first time to qualify for an international competition.
And was he?
But I think can I just make one final point about Jack Charlton? I think I was really struck. When he passed away in July, when you look at the reaction, contrasting the reaction that you saw in England with the reaction you saw over here, I thought the reaction in England was very, very respectful, as you would expect for someone who was a World Cup winner, the one on the team, their only World Cup winning team, as someone who was part of that kind of famed generation of Leeds footballer. But here, it was genuinely affectionate. And I think that has a lot to do with, yes, a nostalgia for the period we associate with Charlton in Irish football, for those great days in Euro 88 and Italia 90. But it's also the qualities, his personal qualities, straight talking, earnest, hard-working, the values that you see reflected in Charlton's teams, that honesty, hard work. There's nothing spiv-like about him, He's a very, very grounded person. And I think people identified with those qualities. I think people warmed to those sort of personal traits. And I think that's partly why Irish people, related to him. And also an awful lot of people actually met him. Like he would travel around Ireland. He would go fishing in Mayo. For a few years there was hardly a pub opening or showroom dealers that Jack Charlton wasn't at. I'd imagine he would have earned more from some of the public appearances he was making than he did from managing the Irish team there for a period.
He certainly, and he was iconic. I mean, if you think of it, that flat cap that he seemed to wear even in very hot weather, he was wearing this flat cap, and it brought across the image of him, but also that he was no nonsense, as you say. He talked straight, and when he started to play the game he played, this kind of the Route 1 ball. I know a lot of people were kind of saying, well, we're spoiling. We have an 8-cylinder engine here with all these brilliant footballers, and we're not using them. And why are we doing that? But it worked, or it seemed to work. And because of the tactic that he chose. And let's remember that he must be, Mark, your research would be more detailed than mine, but he must be the only football manager who was part of a hit #1 single. Where he is actually, his own voice is on put him under pressure, that the song is named after something he says, and that he is himself sampled in the course of put him under pressure, along with the member of U2 and Davy Spillane and all the others. I mean, that is quite a significant achievement, it seems to me.
John, had you put a single out yourself in 1990, I think it possibly would have gone to #1. It was hard for a World Cup song not to top the charts.
There were, that's true.
But,
No, we were all, I mean, and everybody, and of course there was no question of downloading it. You had to get it and buy it. You couldn't download it. But I remember kind of, there was another one, Give It a Lash, Jack, which was pretty good. But I mean, because it was out first, as Paul Rouse says in the exhibition, they give it a chance. One of the things about the exhibition, though, is brilliant, and Mark, I'll let you talk about Eamon Dunphy, but that the exhibition has the famous pen in a box, and it looks like kind of the Derry na Flan chalice, and it's in this box in the exhibition. The pen that Eamon Dunphy threw during the Ireland-Egypt match, where he allegedly said, "I'm ashamed to be Irish." He never said that, but we all sort of said, "Dunphy, how could Dunphy do this? You know, how can he's a traitor." And then, of course, Mark, you hinted at it already, the press conference where Dunphy travelled to Italy, and there was an exchange between himself, or a lack of exchange between himself and Jack Charlton. And what he did was remarkable, because nowadays, you know, a manager would be trying to keep favour with the press and trying not to fall out of them. But Charlton didn't care.
Yeah, no, I've got to come in here with a bit of a plug, because I'm actually talking to Eamon on Sunday night as part of the Galway International Arts Festival about Italia 90. I'm going to be joined by Eamon and by Colm Tobin, the novelist and essayist. And Colm actually was brought over to, Colm was there for the Sunday Independent. He was in Italy throughout the month writing feature pieces on it. And he got a call from Angus Fanning in the wake of the Egypt game, when the country was in uproar over something that Eamon Dunphy didn't say. But Dunphy travelled to Italy the following day, and Angus Fanning, editor of the Sunday Independent, rang Tobin and asked him to be his bodyguard to meet him when he goes over there. And as he pointed out, Colm made the point that I am not the person you want to bodyguard anybody. But I mean, Tobin was instrumental actually in the press conference as well, because when Dunphy posed the question to Charlton and Charlton wouldn't accept it, Tobin tried to ask the question for him, and there ended up being a row in the press conference where there was a clear dividing line between the Irish soccer reporters present and Tobin, Dunphy, and actually the only people who sided with them tended to be the English journalists. So Jack Charlton actually left Jack Charlton and the players who were with him left the press conference, went into an adjacent room, and the Irish soccer reporters, the English writers, didn't follow them. I think that, but it kind of, it reflects upon, you know, an atmosphere where you're either with us or against us, and to criticise the tactics was to criticise the country. Treasonous. And actually, a piece appeared in, I might actually have it here, but a piece appeared in the McGill magazine the following week with a big full-page poster of Eamon Dunphy in Public Enemy #1. Now, Dunphy had been the cover story in McGill the previous month. Really interesting that, you know, Dunphy knew the power of television. You know, I think you mentioned about the big screens in the RDS earlier, John, and all that sort of stuff. The World Cup television, people refer to 1966 as being this kind of defining moment for soccer in Ireland because the World Cup was broadcast. In totality, in 1966, there were only 18 hours of broadcast coverage on single-channel television airing at the time. Most of that coverage, with the exception of the opening games and the closing stages, was highlights packages. You were nearly getting close to 18 hours of coverage in a single day by the time you got to Italia 90. There were 52 games, 41 of them were live. And in that interview with Dunphy prior to it, he makes the point that, you know, this World Cup is going to be experienced on television. He knew that the medium was absolutely crucial. You know, only tens of thousands would indeed travel to Italy, but for the rest of us, you know, we were going to be sitting in front of our television. He realised that is where, you know, that is where really the influence lay. If you're going to analyse something, it needs to be through the medium of television. And I think it's interesting that in Italia 90, I mean, the audiences are huge for television, you know, it is a coming together, but it also revives a tradition of communal viewing of television. In the early days of television in the 1960s, very few people had television sets. Very few parts of the country outside of the East Coast and various other pockets had the signal of television. So it was a very uneven development of television in the 1960s. So what you had, and there's plenty of pictures of this, you know, particularly say around GAA matches, where, you know, for All Ireland finals, which were broadcast, you'd have entire villages coming around to the one house that had the television. Yeah. In 1990, you have a revival of communal viewing. You know, people going into pubs to watch matches, going to places like the RDS, families coming together to watch games as well. I think it's a really interesting development, because at that point, obviously, everyone has televisions in their home.
Yeah, and I remember, like, and I'm sure you remember it well, Mark, as well, that like it wasn't just a question of turning up at the pub. Like, if you wanted to get a good seat at the pub or a good pitch, you had to go early to prepare. And some people would have had a couple of hours preparation inside them before the
at least.
So that was a kind of an essential, but it was also part of the Mehel experience coming together. But you're, as well as the TV, you're right that it was consumed on TV, but the TV presenters embraced it. I'm not talking about the sports presenters, but I recall the night that Ireland played Italy in the World Cup quarter-final, and the news had been brought forward for them. They had the news, and then they went over to the weather. And I remember seeing the weather forecaster from Met Éireann, Dr. Aidan Nulty, sitting there at his desk in a green opal jersey, with a little monitor with a little teddy bear sitting on top of it, also in a little green opal jersey. And on the monitor, instead of showing Ireland, it showed Rome, 20 degrees. Well, Italy, and then kind of an arrow to Rome, and it's, now we've lost it. I mean, like, that's all that matters. And I don't know what the audience figures for that game was, but they must have been enormous. I mean,
I heard
a live match together.
Everybody in Ireland over the age of 4 was supposed to have watched that Romania game.
The Romania game, is that right? Right. That's extraordinary. They took a photograph of somebody during the penalty shootout. Somebody took a photograph on O'Connell Street, and it looked like a post-nuclear explosion. You know, just absolutely empty, deserted.
By '94 World Cup, the highest television audience in the '94 World Cup, it topped 1.7 million people, which is absolutely extraordinary for an Irish match. Absolutely extraordinary. If you think about now, you're looking in around, you know, for All Ireland finals, and it's really only All Ireland finals. It's only Ireland-England rugby internationals. It's only if Ireland get into international competitions that you're actually topping the 1 million mark.
Yeah.
For television viewership, you know.
Yeah, so there would be more people watching Ireland play a country who some people wouldn't have been able to spell the name of, than there would be watching Kerry v Dublin. You know, that's extraordinary. I mean, if you think of what as TV now, and of course it was, and it still is, I suppose, one of the few events that we watch together live. Like everything now you watch is recorded or it's a box set, but a live sports event like in a tournament is watched. We watch together as it happens.
And John, we have a great photo of you. I have it here in the Sunday Correspondence, July 1990.
Yeah, that's the
looking very dapper there.
Yeah, and, losing it a bit.
What were you thinking there? What was going on? I don't know if I was
thinking anything. I don't know if I was thinking anything. Myself and some of my pals went to that on a day trip to that match, and we were led by a colleague who's now president of the Court of Appeal, George Birmingham. So there were 7 of us. So we called ourselves the Birmingham 7. And we flew over on a day trip. There was consternation on the flight, which in fact had been hired from Egyptian Airlines, when we discovered that the plane was dry. No alcohol was served on the plane. And that probably saved us, in fact. But then we arrived, and we went to we found our way eventually to the ground, having found a bar as well. And then we watched the match. And I don't know, they were showing the match again recently during the lockdown, as Mark was saying. It was a shocking game. Like, my friend James McDermott was writing in the paper about the government locking people out of football grounds and public health, for public health reasons. There would be good public health reasons for keeping people away from matches like this to preserve their sanity. It was a really dreadful game because, and of course, we were so nervous as to what would happen. And then as it happened, we were behind the goal where they were taking the penalties. And at that stage, somebody said, "Sing your heart out for the lads." So we all went down to the front and well, I don't know whether you call it singing, but that's what we were trying to do at that stage. And that's what the photographer, that's when the photographer took that snap. And we'd no idea, but myself and my friend Declan Doyle are beside each other with the hats.
So you just decided to go on a whim, was it?
Yeah, it was a day trip. And again, it was this, we're going to do it. Yes, we're going to do it. And this time we said, no, we are going to do it. And I think it cost about £700 along that, it was expensive, like it was dear. But we just said, look, we'll never see this again. We'll never go to a World Cup again. The next, as you know, the next World Cup was in America. The one after that we qualified for was in Japan and Korea. So they were obviously more difficult to get, different propositions, more difficult to get to. But we all went. And then, of course, after the game, when we were trying to get back, we went back to that bar. We became separated from the rest of our entourage, and there were just two of us. We came out of the bar and said, "How are we going to get to the airport?" And we went into a phone box. Neither of us spoke Italian, and at that stage we barely spoke English. We were trying to put lira into the phone box to speak in Italian to an operator to hope that they would find us a taxi. And a police car pulled up beside us and said in the equivalent in Italian, said, "Lads, what are you at?" And we said, "We need to go to the aeroporto," and started making plane motions. And the police kind of took one look at us and said, "Get in." And they took us and put us in the squad car and brought us up, not just to the gate of the airport, but to the terminal to make sure that we wouldn't stay any longer than we absolutely needed to on Italian soil. But and mysteriously in the flight back, they opened the drinks on the plane. So, but I remember coming back that night and driving down being in a car going down O'Connell Street, and there were people jumping in and out of the fountain, the floozy and the jacuzzi. It was warm now. It wasn't that warm. It was June. It was, in fact, it wasn't even June, but it was a remarkable day.
And you gave us another newspaper cutting. It says that Ireland was 28-1 to win the World Cup. So exactly how much money did you lose?
I didn't put any money on them. I mean, 28-1. Okay, there were 8 teams left in it. I bet we were the outsiders. And of course, we were playing the hosts. We were playing Italy. So, in Rome. So our chances were kind of remote. But I mean, it was, there was one goalkeeping error led to it. That's, I think that story about the Irish team met the Pope beforehand, before the quarterfinal, and the Pope Pope John Paul II had been a goalkeeper in Poland, so he was very interested to meet Packie Bonner, but obviously Packie spilled the ball and Scalacci stuck it in the net, and the rest is history.
It was probably, John, our standout performance of that World Cup. Remarkably, we went through that World Cup without actually winning a game.
Yeah,
I mean, without winning a game in regulation time, But I always thought the Italian performance was the best of the lot. In fact, I seem to have a recollection of us creating opportunities. Paul McGrath hitting the bar. Hitting the bar, yeah. Was it? Hit the bar?
Yeah, we hit the bar. Yeah.
Because prior to that, there was very little really to recommend, the Irish team. I mean, we go back to the Egypt game. I mean, the England game to start off with. One of the Italian sports newspapers said, it was so dull it put the hooligans to sleep.
Yes, that's embarrassing.
And that was better than the Egypt game that followed, that Ireland was in. And then you had the Netherlands match. which sealed our qualification. Like, the irony is that the goal that Niall Quinn got that actually put us through came through this direct route, which had been derided by Emma Duffy in relation to the Egypt performance. Is kind of just long punt and hope for a break. And just the break fell. I mean, Liam Brady was doing the commentary with the BBC at the time. He said, where are Jack Charles critics now? But it's not something we created. It's something that materialized from just, the style of football that we were playing. When we get to, Romania, I mean, like, the standout footballer on the pitch, was Hadji for Romania. Like, every time we got the ball, you felt that actually something, danger here. There was a threat. You would look at the Irish team and say, well, where there was plenty of very good footballers, but where in possession when we get the ball are we actually going to pose a threat here? We're hoping for something to break.
That's absolutely right. And it's worth remembering that if you go back to that Holland game, you think of there were people like Ruud Gullit and all those guys who had been around. But if you remember, Mark, when Ireland scored that goal, and I think about the 71st minute or so, around that, so there was still kind of good bit of almost 20 minutes to play. But I think what happened then was that news reached the players that if Ireland and Holland drew this game, they would both go through to the next round, the playoff round. And there's montage of a conversation taking place between the Dutch captain and Mick McCarthy, who's the Irish captain. And effectively, after that news got onto the pitch, they played for a draw. That neither team challenged each other. They just said, if we both go through, because I think England were winning the match against Egypt, and therefore whatever concatenation of events were required. I mean, it was a pretty complex system, but whatever it required, all we needed was a draw, provided Egypt didn't come back.
We draw after that, wasn't there? They decided who would be the second and third place.
Yeah, and then we drew Romania. Exactly. Yeah. But that's that I think that's something that people kind of sometimes forget. But yes, Mark, we scored 2 goals in 4 games. Yeah. You think of it,
and look at the 2 goals. The Kevin Sheedy one was a mistake in the English defence. The goal against Netherlands was a spilled ball by the goalkeeper, actually. Now there was something poetic in the Niall Quinn goal against the Dutch, because obviously they knocked us out of Euro '88 with an extraordinary slice of good fortune for them, a ball kind of curved around Packy Bonner's hands in that game to put us out of the competition. So there was a poetic justice, I think, to that one.
But I mean, it was pretty inelegant, both of them. I mean, the Sheedy goal wasn't a bad goal, but it was a mistake. Quinn was just up there making a nuisance of himself and sticks out his foot, and he scores. And of course, he's famous forever, But you need a bit of luck. And Charlton, if you think of Napoleon asking, has he got a luck? Are his generals lucky? Charlton got that bit of luck, as you say. He got it with Scotland winning away in Bulgaria. He got it, with the circumstances leading to the fact that if a draw between England and Ireland and Holland was good enough. He got a lot of luck. I'm not saying he didn't deserve it, but he did get a lot of luck.
He once said that he wasn't very good at playing football, but he was very good at stopping people playing football. Well, yes. I wonder if that, did that translate into his managerial style? Because it was described as agricultural.
He had a dispute with Dave O'Leary, didn't he? I mean, that's why O'Leary was exiled. And then you have this kind of Shakespearean situation where the fate of the nation holding its breath, is waiting for Dave O'Leary. But your researchers would know about, you'd be able to tell us about it.
You're talking about the very kind of crude style of play, it's captured in that song, put them under pressure. It was all about what we were doing to the opposition, not necessarily what we were doing ourselves when in possession. And just this morning, I was kind of really interested. I heard Stephen Kenny, the new Irish soccer manager, who's kind of embarking on his own managerial career, and he was talking about hoping that an Irish team would move away from a British type of game. Now, I suspect he's talking about an old British style of game, because the British game is no longer a British game; it's a global game. It's one of the changes that we've seen since the 1990s. But he's talking about a possession-based game, a creative game, game of football. And if there's a criticism of Ireland under the Charlton years, and even subsequent, is that we perhaps didn't make the most of the talents of the players that we had. Our achievements were unprecedented. Getting to a quarter final is an extraordinary, accomplishment. But could we have done better with the players that we had playing a different type of football, with maybe perhaps a bit more subtlety, a more possession-based game, rather than one which it talked about? I mean, I think Jack Charlton used to use this term, inflict ourselves on the opposition.
It's in the song, yeah.
And again, it's like we are going to be the nuisance, actually last night RTE broadcast part of their series of classic sporting moments, Ireland versus Spain in the 1989 World Cup qualifier. It is classic only because Ireland beat Spain 1-0, and it was a kind of key moment in that qualifying campaign. There was nothing classic about the game. It was just, and you're looking at the Irish players and you could not fault the effort. It is very, very high tempo. Players were required to run themselves into the ground, when they're not in possession, in terms of, making sure that actually no other team developed cohesion, weren't able to compose themselves on the ball. And, again, it's that idea of inflicting yourself on the opposition. But the other thing that struck you was actually Lansdowne on the pitch was appalling. It was absolutely dreadful. I mean, it was lumpy. If you saw that in the public park, for an underage game, you'd be asking questions.
I remember Brian Kerr talking about one of the pitches. I think it was when we were playing the Faroes or something like that, and he said, "This pitch is minging." And like the Lansdowne Road wasn't a whole lot better. I mean, I suppose it was because of the rugby and so on.
It's a rugby pitch, yeah. It's a rugby pitch.
But I suppose we didn't have a player, with the exception of Liam Brady, we didn't have a player who could create. If you think of England, they had, even in 1990, they had Waddle, they had Gascoigne. They had people who would put the heart crossways in. You're playing against them. We didn't have somebody who could play the kind of ticky-tacky that we love to see Barcelona play, or when they did play it. We didn't have players who could do that. We had players who were talented and strong, but I think my memory of the English league at that stage, there wasn't a Premiership at that stage, but it was a pretty physical league as well. It wasn't the kind of glorious ticky-tacky one-touch football that we see more of now, was it?
No, but you did have players like Ronnie Whelan. You had people on the Irish team who were
capable of more.
Who'd actually won serious honours in English football, who were playing for the top teams in English football in a way that, I mean, just given the changes in the way the English game developed subsequently, it's really hard for an Irish player to actually play at that particular level, simply because it's, as I said earlier, it's a globalized game. The arrival of the Premiership, these places just became awash with money, and also you had the free movement of players, with the Bosman ruling, so the Anglo-Irish League was now very much an international one. It was a European, it was a global,
Yeah. Are there any? I mean, there would be very few players from the top 6 teams in the Premier League who would make it on, who are kind of Irish, isn't that right? There would be, whereas back then you had Man United, Arsenal, Team Liverpool, who were supplying lots of players to the Republic of Ireland side. Whereas I don't think Man City or Liverpool are supplying any, or Chelsea. I can't think of any, certainly offhand. I mean, there would have been Declan Rice if he decided, but obviously he didn't. And I don't think there are any of them in from the top half. Maybe a couple from Stoke, but apart from that, there's very few.
Yeah. Well, I think we might need to wrap it up. It's been a really quick hour. Can't believe how fast the time has passed. Just like to say thanks. Oh, there's one question here. Maybe guys, if you were, someone's asking, what did Eamon Dunphy actually say to cause all that consternation?
Mark, you've dealt with this in the script in the show, and I really recommend the show, by the exhibition, by the way. But Mark has the detail on this.
I do, and of course now I've gone blank and I can't remember it. I know what he did not say. He did not say, "I'm ashamed to be Irish." I think it was something along the lines, and I'm paraphrasing here, "I would be ashamed to put out a team playing like that," you know, which is very different. But people heard one thing and they assumed it, and actually Dunphy, as I said, the following day travelled out to Italy to attend the Ireland Netherlands game. And when he was in the airport, an awful lot of supporters already by that point, you know, his comments had caused huge controversy, you know, and he talks about in his memoir, A Rocky Road, really good book actually. He talks about gangs of supporters coming around him in the airport. You know, he said a very intimidating atmosphere. You know, he got similar treatment outside the ground as he was going into that kind of into that Ireland Netherlands match as well, you know, where a lot of fans would come in and around him, and you know, very aggressive chanting in his face, you know, which I, you know, using terms I'm not going to repeat here at tea time, but
part of him loved it though, Mark, wasn't there? I mean, there was a part of Eamon that you know, reveled in this kind of publicity and controversy, and you know, I'm not saying he did that deliberately. I think he genuinely did believe that the Irish team were capable of more, but he didn't shy away from the controversy or the topicality.
No, I think he was genuinely shook by this. Again, I'm going back and reading the memoir, and because he got similar treatment when he arrived back. He went back over to Rome for the Ireland-Italy game, flew back the following day, and he arrived on an earlier flight, the flight prior to the Irish team returning home. So you have 500,000 people on the streets of Dublin. The crowd was kind of likened to that which met the Pope in 1979, you know. And when he arrived in, he was advised by a guard to maybe take a long way around because and go home, avoid the city centre, because he was just going to be, he'd be driving into kind of crowds of people who were kind of lined on the streets all the way into the city centre. So I think in the wake of the World Cup, he kind of laid low for a bit. I think he was off writing one of his books after that. You know, it was kind of a time to kind of just let the air out of the situation, I suppose. But so, like, obviously, he's a man who's a controversialist. He's not someone who kind of shies from the row. But like, it was like the criticisms he was making in Italia '90 was he wasn't striking a pose, and I say that because there was form there. He'd clashed with Charlton in his very first. In his very first press conference. He had issues with Charlton over the performances in Euro '88, over the exiling of David O'Leary, over the treatment of Liam Brady. So yeah, there is a consistency to him also when he's addressing issues around the style of play and Charlton's handling of certain players.
Yeah, and that's, I suppose, part of his charm, if you like, and like, it is part of the memory. I mean, as the richness of the memories include the memories of the coverage of it on TV. I mean, looking at the clothes people were wearing, Bill O'Herlihy in a yellow V-neck jumper, the little hat with the clappy hands that is also in the Little Museum of Dublin's exhibition. You know, some of the clothes, there were crimes against fashion. Whatever about crimes against football, there were certainly crimes against fashion, and the luridness of the colour was such that you couldn't avoid them.
There was, again, context is really important. Why does it matter? Ireland is on this cusp of an extraordinary social and cultural transformation. You know, in the mid-90s, the year Jack Charlton took over the Irish team, unemployment was 17%.
Yeah.
Last month, it's, I think it was 16.8, 16.9, and that is with us deliberately closing down large parts of our economy. 70% is extraordinary. Like 200,000 people left Ireland, you know, involuntarily. during the 1980s, which feeds into the Dermot Bulger play.
My two brothers and my sister. I've two brothers and sister, and they all had moved to England.
Yeah.
By that stage, which was remarkable. And obviously that was because there weren't jobs here.
Yes.
It was very difficult.
So that's why it's choice. And like John mentioned earlier about Roddy Doyle's book The Man, which is the third part of that Barrytown trilogy, and also Dermot Bulger's In High Germany play. They use football, but really the football is just a vehicle to explore a much wider social experience. And in Bulger's, it's emigration. Emigration is really the theme of that book. There's a variety of themes in Roddy Doyle's book, but why are these two middle-aged men with children and family responsibilities coming together, to try and kind of improvise and sell chips during the World Cup?
Do they sell a Dunphy and chips, Mark? Isn't one of the
Dunphy and chips
specialities of the van, which becomes a chipper van, is a Dunphy and chips, which is a big long sausage that resembles a male appendage, and it's called a Dunphy and chips by one of the wags.
But so that again, but why are they doing it? High levels of unemployment. That is they're trying to turn a book at the time. So I think that's also. I think that kind of matters in how people reflect on that moment, and why, by the time we qualified for two of the following three World Cups, nothing compares to Italia 90. 94 in America, despite the fact, of all our World Cup performances, we beat Italy in Giant Stadium. An extraordinary night in our first game, but no sooner was that game over than we heard the news from Loughlin Island, about loyalist gunmen going into a bar and murdering, a number of Catholics who are watching the match. So it's immediately overshadowed, and that World Cup really did peter out with a number of very poor performances. We played some really nice football in the 2002 World Cup, particularly against Spain, and when we went out by penalty shootout. But that World Cup is entirely overshadowed by the controversy that preceded the Saipan experience. So, we talked about Dunphy Gate in 1990. That in no way punctured people's experience of the World Cup. Whereas I'm not sure you could say that about 94 or 2002. 2002 ended up with just a kind of a very divisive experience, because the Keane McCarthy divide was being played out on every radio program, television program, and newspaper. So the World Cup didn't bring us together. It kind of, it really did polarize opinion.
And if you think of it, the fondness and nostalgia with which we remember this, where we got no further than the quarterfinal, even though a couple of years ago our Irish hockey team got to the final of the World Cup. But I just would be surprised if there would be people in 30 years' time talking about that. There's, you have described in the exhibition, and I think there's a photo of it, of a European summit meeting in Dublin taking place at the time of the shootout. And when Ireland succeed, when O'Leary scores and Ireland go through, the place is in uproar. And John Healy, the Irish Times correspondent, is in tears. Like, he is weeping, and you can see this on television. And he's not the only one. But Margaret Thatcher, who's attending, says, calm down, everybody. We haven't won anything. They haven't won anything. I said, yes, but you don't understand how much this means.
That's putting us in our place.
Yeah, and that's because they've only won one. But I mean,
don't lose the run of yourself, Paddy.
Yeah, exactly. It's just patronising, I suppose, in some sense. But I suppose it sums it up that this is our moment, and I think that the penalty shootout is frequently, when they have these kind of polls about what's the greatest sporting moment, I think it's ahead of the All Irelands and the kind of grand national wins and the all those kind of events. And Sonia, I mean, we have to remember Sonia Sullivan, all our Olympic medals, John Tracy, and so on, all of those achievements. Our sailors, But this seems to have caught the imagination in a way that it's no other sporting event that I can think of.
And you can all come in and to the little museum and experience it and relive it again anytime you want to for the next few months.
Really worthwhile. It's a brilliant exhibition.
Thanks a million. And I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to wrap it up there. But I'd like to say huge thanks to John and Mark. It was very entertaining and great crack. And thanks to all our attendees for joining us today. And so we'll see you soon in the museum, and all the best, and take it easy.
Thanks, Mark.
See you, Mark, and see you, John.
Thanks, Mark. See you, Mark. Good luck. Thanks, Mark.